What? I typed something and then. All right. Now, would like to design this entity relationship model about a company that needs to store information about employees identified by SSN. So employee is an entity. Oh, this is an entity. Double click, employee, and we have an employee. Now this employee has many attributes: SSN, salary, phone. That's enough for us. So I'm just going to add one attribute, SSN, and obviously the SSN should be unique. So I'm going to underline it, which should be my primary key. Okay, SSN, and then phone and salary, right? Control U just removes the salary, and Control U is like removing that. So this is this one, and this one points to here. So that's the first one. Then we have department. Copy, paste, and then I can change department that has DNO, DNAME, DNO, DNAME, or department name, and budget. Okay, this is how I can quickly add one other. And children of employees with name and age as attributes.
So, weak entity?
It's a weak entity?
Yes.
Why is it a weak entity?
Because the next connected with the employee.
If we continue the question, it says that if the employee is no longer in the company, the children should be removed from the data. The child information should be removed.
So that's how you know it's a weak entity?
Yes, and there is no
because it's related with the employee. If the employee removed,
this is not how we know if it's a weak entity. Let me tell you one thing. We remove all students from the college. Does it mean that we were going to remove all the departments, all the courses, all the faculty members because there are no students? Maybe we're just going to remove everything and then we start from scratch or whatever, or we just cancel the whole year or something like that. This is not how we know that an entity is weak. You remember, to know how an entity is weak is how when we would like to identify uniquely an entity, an element of that entity, and then we can't because we need something else from another entity. That's how we can say that, oh, this is a weak entity that depends on another one. That's how you know that this is a weak entity, not because if we remove it, the other one is going to be removed. It applies to weak entities somehow, but it's not like the indication that it is a weak entity. The indication is how to identify uniquely each element, record, let's say, if we look at in that entity, and you cannot identify it uniquely by the information that you have there, then you need some other information that comes from another one. There was a question.
what the question means is we are not interested in information of the child. So is there something to know?
Well, for now, we're not interested in the information about the child. It just tells you that the child is not our main focus here. Our focus is in the employee, and he has a child, fine, but then that's all what it means. It might mean that the child maybe can be a weak entity, but it's not for sure that it's a weak entity because of that. There was another question? Yeah. So now, this being said, let's have a look at this children of employee, because we have name and age. Now this name and age, which one is the primary key? Name is the primary key, and this is still not an entity but a weak entity. Not because of that thing here, but because if you give me a name without giving me the father, I cannot uniquely identify that person. Now if you give me a name, let's say Muhammad, that's a name of a child, but do you think there's going to be only one child in this company that going to be named Muhammad? So if you tell me, okay, Muhammad, whose father is Muhammad, but you have like 3 Muhammads, then how can you know? So you say Muhammad the kid of that guy, or Muhammad the kid of the other guy, so the other employee. So in order to uniquely identify a kid, a child, you need to get some information from the employee, so you know the child of this employee. And you won't be having 2 children from the same employee with the same name. Nobody calls 2 of his kids Muhammad, right?
Yes. Can we add a new attribute?
You can.
As a father assistant?
Well,
To be the bind-
no. When doing it as a weak entity, the result of that is what you're adding. The result of when I do such a thing is that in the database I will be creating a table called children, and it will be having a column which is the employer's SSN as a foreign key, and then with the name, both of them are the primary key. Because if you give me SSN and then a name, I will be able to tell you who's the kid, what are the other information about that kid, what's his age and something like that. Yes.
So it is a weak entity because the primary key cannot be identified uniquely. If the kid has like an ID, it's not a weak entity because it has an ID.
If it has an ID and you can uniquely identify that child, then the other things kicks in. Now this other one, this other a child must be identified uniquely by name when the parent, who is assumed to be an employee, is known, and this part over here. Now this tells you that the child is uniquely identified by name when the parent is known. So it tells you that this is a weak entity, not the one that we're not interested about, this other part over here, as it was discussed. This other part just confirms, but it doesn't tell you exactly that this is a weak entity. But this one, this is what tells you this is a weak entity. Now if it is a weak entity, then you add ID. Your question is it going not to be a weak entity?
Yeah.
No, it will,
Even with the,
unless I remove this line.
yeah, if the ID was the primary key.
Yes, then they're going to be not a weak entity because, yeah, they're not dependent on. But still, with this relationship, this children is normally based on associated to the father. So, in order to uniquely identify him, you need the information about the father. Like you have the first name, middle initial, which is with the name, which is the father's name, then his last name. So there's the relationship, anyways. So it needs that. But this line. This is what makes it a weak entity. Yes.
Can I say it's weak because I cannot access the children
Unless
without the
exactly
parent?
without the
Cannot
parents.
enter
Yes.
it without the parent.
Yes. It's not that you cannot enter it. It's that you cannot have the information unless you have the information about the parent.
Right.
Yeah. So that's the children,
Name and age.
and they have name and age. Okay. Just would like to put them closer so I can zoom in a little bit. Now I have the name, which should be how I identify it, but because it's a weak entity, it will also depend on the employee, So it will also need to have identified relationship. Yes.
You cannot change the name like if it's SSN or something.
No, because this is something that was telling you that they need this type of information. So they need the A name and the age.
The same information.
Which one?
I mean, SSN, it's the same information. We just
I thought I made a mistake. I thought this should be named, not SSN.
yeah.
But when you do this, there's a relationship, let's say like this, and then there's a relationship. This is the identifying relationship that's going to tell me that this is related to the employee, and then it's
Employee of.
son of, for example. Well, children is not always son, is child of maybe, because son is only for male.
Yeah.
It could be the girl, daughter of, yes.
Let's say the employee has a name, not an SSN, as a private key.
Yes.
Then it will become a weekend, right? It depends on the
Yeah, in the database, when you're going to be doing that, relationship is going to end up being the name and the name of the father, then the name of the child, then the age. If we assume that this is not SSN but name instead of SSN, yes. If we do this, the result is going to be a table. No, what do you mean weak entity?
the employee becomes a weekend.
No. The employee is not a weak entity because we changed its ID.
But now the primary key of the employee is the name. Maybe there is two father.
Well, then this name now needs to be is not a good primary key. So then, yeah, no, this is not the idea is that this is not correct because of the name. But I was trying to answer your question as if I change this to name. I thought maybe your question was, if I change this to name, then the name is going to be also name of the father going to be here in the database. That was what I was trying to answer. But now, basically, the name is not enough because you might have two employees with the same first name and last name, unless your name has 3 different parts or more, and then it's kind of highly unlikely that all of them are equal.
What if the employee is connected to another entity that defines the certain employee?
Okay.
That will become, the employee will become a weak entity, right?
If the employee is needing another information to be uniquely identified, yes. And then it will be a weak entity pointing to identifying, yeah, it can. It's kind of very unlikely, but that's possible, theoretically. So when you have a weak entity, you have to select which one is the entity that it is depending on.
The relationship between departments.
I just would like to make sure that you see if I did not. That's it. That's all we have. So employees work in departments. So that's what you were talking about. So we have a relationship between employees. Oops. Work in a department, or works. An employee works in a department, or works for, or works in. Yeah. Can you do what? Add another relationship? This is the parent of, yes. When you put a verb, sometimes it's hard to put a verb that works on both sides. But if you're able to take it in one side, child of or parent of, or it's as long as we understand the type of relationship it is. If in one direction or the other one, whatever comes to you is okay. No, it's not one side. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Now, in some type of sometimes the information, if it's confusing, you can add the role, which is like you can say employee is a parent of. You write somewhere here, and there's a way how you can just write something and to explain what's the role of this entity in this relationship. And sometimes you have a word here that explains that role. So, like parent of, and son of, or daughter or child of, and then here you put some kind of kids or child, whatever. Okay, each department is managed by an employee. Okay, what does it mean, this?
Same relationship, but with managed.
So it's another relationship, not the same relationship, it's another relationship. Oops. This time it's managers so manages or something like that. So there are two relationships in there. One that just captures he works for, the other one he manages a department. And the child must be identified uniquely by name. So this tells you don't add an extra column, an extra attribute by saying ID, this is going to be my primary key. It tells you now the primary key is the name. When the parent is known, this means, okay, now I need to make this dependent on the parent. So this is a weak entity related to the parent, and this is the employee, sorry.
And the name is except only one name.
Here?
Yeah, only one.
What do you mean, only one?
Only one wall.
The name? Well, no, nothing is mentioned here.
He means the first name.
It doesn't only mention that, but that's what we assume. Yeah. Let's say just the first name of the kid. Yeah. Because when we link it to the employee, we know his last name, anyways. Yes. To what? Because an employee, this relationship allows us to know that what is when an employee works in a department, what kind of how many, for example, and now this is another type of relationship that an employee can have within a department. He's a manager of that department. In which example? Which last? In week 2? When we did this? Yeah. I think you have a bad memory, or I have a bad memory. So let's have a look. Now, what do we have? Department, faculty, and we're talking about faculty is belonging to a department. Oh, we did not add another thing? Yes, you're right. Yes, so I have bad memory. And this one, which is to be the chairperson, for example. That's what you're talking about? Yes, we could have. But I was not interested into adding too many things. Yeah.
It always depends on what is required.
Because my idea is just to get you started. No, if it's mentioned, it's not okay. Like for example here, I'm telling you what the kind of relationship that employees have with department. They work in department, and it's managed by. So I'm explicitly mentioning it. And there I wasn't, so you were trying to come up what you think is enough. Yeah, so it's mentioned, so we have to put it. That's why I said when you have a long requirement, it's easier for you, so you don't have to guess. When you have a short requirement, you have to try to guess what's going to be needed and what it's not. Okay, so that's all what we have. Now we just need to focus on employees working departments. So what kind of cardinality does this give us? One employee can work for how many departments?
One or more.
One or more?
Yes.
Why?
Departments.
No.
Because it says employees work in departments.
So what do you want?
But employees doesn't say one employee work in departments. So it says employees work in departments. It could be that one employee works in many. It could be that he works only in one. We don't have any information. So you choose whatever you think is right, but you mentioned that I assume that one employee works with only in one. So in the part here, you have to add some kind of assumption. How to do that? I maybe add this. This is no settings. How to add a comment? No, I would like to add a note, and I forgot how to do that.
Press the arrow.
Oh, I was maybe looking out for this thing. So I can just put some text here or some, yeah, like text like this. I'm sorry? What is it? Well, if it's explicitly specified, then yes, I have to respect it. But when it's vague, I need to come up with I need to make a decision about the cardinality itself. I'm not sure if I understood your question. Not really. Alaikum salam. It says employees works in departments. Now, if you have 5 people, these are employees. You have 2 departments or 5 departments, let's say. Now, does it mean that some of them might work in many departments, or each one of them work in only one department? So there is no clear indication. It could be one or the other. We don't know. So that's why, I mean, we need to make a decision, take a decision about what do we think is going to be. What did I do? Okay, now Abdullah, you just came, right? So I need to mention, what I'm trying to say is that this sentence here can mean 2 things. One employee works in many departments, or one employee works in one department. But we don't know for sure which one it is, because it says employees work in departments. That's so general, so vague. If we have a situation when in a company one employee can work in many departments, and if I say employees work in departments, that is true. If we have in a company employees that only work in one department, but each one work in different department, now we say employees work in departments. That's still true. So we don't know now which one is which. So I have to make a decision. Every time you take a decision in a modeling, you have to take note of it. So as an assumption, you're going to assume assumptions. I'm going to do something like, okay, one employee works in one department. One employee work in one department. Now, which means if somebody give you this data from a company, you still have to validate your understanding. You have to come back to them and tell them, when you said that employees work in departments, you mean one employee works in many departments or works in one? So you need to ask that to validate it. And if you just come up with your own, you have to choose whatever you think makes sense. So you need to you take note that you took that decision. It's not from the requirements, but it's coming from you. So you distinguish what comes from the requirement, what is coming from you. And once I have this assumption now, I can put one employee works in how many departments? Only one. And then one department can have how many employees working in it? Now the 0 is kind of interesting. If you put 0, that means there are some departments, nobody worked in them. I mean, that's unusual. If you would like to put the 0, you put it as an assumption. But if I put 1, should I put an assumption? No, because that's generally what happens. So if I don't want to put an assumption, I'm advising you, if you have the option not to put an assumption, don't put the assumption. Go with whatever is already there. Why you would like to add some extra things? You add extra things, you have to check them, that maybe you add something that is not correct. But just if you don't need to put any, assumption, you go for that option first.
But we add one, that's one employee work in one department, so you can't add
Where?
the assumption.
So if you have one assumption, that means let's just add 10 of them.
So we can't just
You,
apply
c-
to the
you,
right
c-
one.
you can add. I mean, if you want, like, if you put 0 here, what I'm trying to say, if you put a 0, that's fine. Just put an assumption that you say one employee. We can have one department that has no employees. Highly unlikely, but that's your assumption. Just you just clearly state in it. But that's not something that is useful. Usually, what happens, right? So why would you put the effort into doing something that is likely not to be the case, and you leave like 95% is going to be one employee works in one company, but no, I don't like the 95%. I would like to go with the 5% chance that they're going to be not having a company. It's not really wise. That's what I'm trying to say. You can do that if you want. No, I insist. In my mind, departments can be departments without any employee. Fine, just put an assumption. At least you cover your back. You're not doing something. Nobody is going to tell you, "Oh, you got this wrong," because nothing was mentioned here. That's it's 0. How comes you come up with that from that to the top of your head? Now, if you put it somewhere like this, you're trying to justify what you did. Yes, I'm done with you. Yes.
Isn't the assumption that we wrote now negate the fact that there is a department that has no employee?
No, I'm not talking about the departments here. I'm talking about employees. This assumption is about employees. What's their relationship with the department? I'm not saying departments, what's the relationship with the employees. It's a one-side assumption. It's from employee to department, not the other way around. Yes.
So the number you chose is from you, right?
Which numbers?
One employee to one working on one department. It's not. It doesn't mention the question, right?
No. No.
So I can put any number I want, right?
As long as it makes sense, yes.
But if I make this one, so
You can put any number you want based on what this is talking about. The point is, okay, when I put a number here, this number has a meaning. Where did I get that meaning from? Normally it should come from here. Now if it doesn't come from here, you say, oh, there's not enough information, I should take a decision. Then you write it down. Then you put whatever number you want. But if it's clearly mentioned in something, why would you do something different and then justify it? Unless you really know what you're doing. The main idea is that if something is not clear mentioned here and you want to put it, put a note as an assumption. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, why is this thing bothering me? Anyways. Is that okay? Okay, now what about the employee and managers department? So one employee manages. Okay, now you see, that's the normal thing. I'm going to use this as an example of why I'm not going to be doing the assumption. Now, can't we have in some organization that one employee manages both two departments? That's possible. But normally, generally, that's not the case. Most probably, every department has one person. That's what happens. Do we have any information telling us that we can have an employee that manages more? Each department is managed by an employee. But now we have some information here that tells us an employee is managed by which? Which side are we talking about? This line is talking about which direction? From the employee to the department, or from the department to the employee? No, this is not both. Because each department is managed by an employee. Does it say it's going to be uniquely? Is the sentence the same than if I say each department is managed by one employee? Answer my question. is the sentence the same if I change an employee by one employee?
No.
The information has changed now. I'm putting more detail and telling you it's not about an employee, because an employee can be an employee that is already managing another. No. In this case, it's exactly the same. Because when talking, I'm trying to confuse you. Why? Because I want you not to, when you read a sentence, it generally tells you a direction about where to start from and where to stop. Now, when we're talking about each department is managed by an employee, you know, we're talking about one department is managed by how many employees? One direction. So I'm talking about the caveat that I'm going to put here, not here. I'm not talking about this one. I'm talking about this one. So let's do this.
So the directions
So each department is managed by an employee. Does it say how many? But an employee means, it's not like employees is managed by employees. If it was plural, then yes, it's a different thing. It means that we can have many employees managing the same department. But that's not the case. We said an employee and one employee, that's exactly the same thing. But if it was by employees, if it was an S, that was different. But let's just do this and then continue from there. So now what should we put here? One as a minimum and a maximum.
Both. Only one.
Can't we do this?
what's that?
Because he
Is it is managed by an employee? That means it doesn't mean there should be at least one. And because there's no S, it's just one.
Yes.
So
Only one.
I cannot put 0. I'm putting 1. Now one employee, now this is where this stops. I have nothing here that tells me one employee can you manage more than one department or just one. There's nothing in here that tells me anything about that. So I have the option now. What do I want to choose? An employee manages one department only,
Yes. What's wrong?
or many departments?
One department.
But let me, before the many, that's the maximum. What is the minimum? One employee can manage what's the minimum that an employee can manage?
One.
Zero. Zero.
So 1 or 0. Why 0?
Because an employee can control the department.
That means we can have some employees that do not manage any departments.
Yes.
But if there's an employee who manages a department, there's going to be only one department that it manages. That's why this is 0 or 1. But here, a department is managed at least by 1, at maximum by 1. So that's why we have 1 in the minimum and the maximum. But from here, if we look at all the employees, they can manage no departments. Just again, look at these like drawers. You open a drawer, many files of each one of the employees. Take one employee. How many departments does he manage? 0. Okay. How many departments does he manage, this guy? 1. Okay. So what are the different possibilities? Can you have like one who manages 2, 3 departments? Then if it's yes, you have to put it there. There should be many then. But if it's not the case, it's there. Now, 1 here, the discussion that we had earlier. Does one employee, can one employee manage more than one department? It's possible in some organization that we have an employee managing more than one department. But that's not the general idea about how people manage departments, right? Most probably in any organization, one employee manages only one department. That's what happens most probably. So you go with that. But if you put many, it's not wrong unless you don't put any assumption. That means you just thought maybe that was meant from the requirements.
So if I put one or many, it's okay.
It's okay as long as you put an assumption, because you show that this is not coming from here, it's coming from your understanding.
Yes.
But if you put, for example, like this, and you put no assumptions, it's a mistake.
Yes.
And the last thing is employee and child.
Doctor,
Yeah.
1 or many, I put assumption.
Which one?
The employee management department. Yeah, this one.
Employee managers department. This one.
Yeah. If I put one.
Many?
Or many. Also.
No, one is not. One is a mistake. If you say that employees manage one or many, that means if you take among all your employees, anyone you take is going to be managing a department, which is not possible unless you have one department for every employee, which is kind of weird. But whatever, if it happens in real life and you have to model it, yes, do that. But I'm just saying that the one is kind of weird. But if you do something like the many, you have to put an assumption in the maximum. Now what about this? One employee can have
Many child. Zero or many.
zero or many. And one children is the child of
One or many.
Only one?
one.
Because in the question it said
read it.
only one employee.
I think it says assume one employee will do.
Okay, I'm just trying to delete things. Sometimes this comes in the way, and you have to really be lucky to get it out. So it says, as you said, a child must be identified uniquely by name when the parent, who is an employee, assume that only one parent works for the company.
Only one.
So it tells you that there's not both parents are working for the company.
Only one.
So
One.
it's zero
Zero to many.
or many. That means one children has zero or many parents. I'm interested about the zero. Also the many. So it's not possible.
Only one or two.
Based on this, it's one. All right.
But if don't I have to change the relationship since I am moving both sides and the
Since
relationship-
you are what?
I'm moving both sides.
What do you mean moving?
I'm going from employee to children
Yes.
and from children to employee.
Yes.
But the relationship is says child of and it's only
No, it doesn't matter. No, this. Yeah, you're right.
we can make it as has, for example. Has or
Has what? A children has an employee.
an employee has children or a child.
Now I understand what you're talking about. This can be misleading sometimes, but the main thing is that it's very hard that you can find a verb that is going to work in both ways. Sometimes it works, like for example, an employee works in the department has employee working in it, something like that. But this gives you an idea. This work and working, and this is not. You can play it a little bit just to get the sentence, the English sentence right. But the meaning is what's important here. The meaning is this relationship. This is a child of this. Now that's what the relationship is all about. That's why we write child of. But then when you're looking at the other sense, like one employee is not the child of children. It's obviously not that situation. But if you look at from this side, we understand the relationship. So I can understand that this relationship, that means if this one is the children of this guy, then this guy is the parent of these children. So I'm going to just use this not as my base of my sentence that I'm going to use to find the cardinality, but just to understand the type of relationship. And it's very hard to find a verb that is going to be useful for our. If you find, for example, one for this thing, just tell it to me, I'm going to use it. But it's kind of hard. And instead of wasting time trying to come up with that, which is not really that important, the use of this verb is to make you understand the relationship. As long as we understand it from one way, we can get the other send of the other way. So that's my take on that. And that's the exercise 1. A lot of fun. A lot of fun. Did you get something similar to this?
The majority though.
Without the assumption.
Without the assumption?
Yeah.
Now the assumption is something you should pay attention to, because if you do everything right and you have the assumptions missing, If this was a quiz, for example, or you want going to take some marks. Yes. So week 3, exercise 1. Yes.
The solution will be in your website.
On Blackboard. All the files are going to be on Blackboard. Because the website does not have a lot of space. So I put everything on Blackboard. Like here. Like what I put here. Now I don't want to show, these are some old files. This is something we did, but I prefer now, this is much better. I got better at this using this tool, so that's why I'm going to replace that with this new one.